this looks good.
Oh my God, this is
All right, and
delicious.
now we are moving into our main topic of the day, our plate of the day. We need you, Uncle Sam says, but you are Black in the military. And John, we just want to unpack with you your experience with the military and what that has been like as a Black man in America. So, my first question to you, John, is what was your perception of the military prior to even joining? And what was your relationship with it?
Sure. I think the second question is like very key to understanding my whole thought process on all this, right? So, to answer your second question, to kind of revert back to the first, my relationship to the military, like all growing up, was that my father served in the military. So when I was adopted by my family, my father was an active duty Army enlisted member, and he was like the grunt. Like he was infantry. They're like there's enlisted in the officer structure. The officer structure is more like admin, like more overseeing kind of shit. And the enlisted is more like they're like cannon fodder. They're like if there's a war popping off, like you gone, and that's what I understood about my dad before I even understood the concept of military, was that like my pops was gonna be like if there was war popping off, like my dad's the first one to go. So the first 7 years of my life I spent on a military base, and especially again being enlisted, you don't have a choice in where you choose to live. Like, excuse me, when you're enlisted, you get stationed somewhere and they're just like, you live on this street. You do not get to pick your neighbors. You do not get to pick any sort of amenities. Like, it just is what it is. And I am grateful for that, honestly. Like, especially growing up in Georgia and growing up in a Black family, of like, we got placed into this cul-de-sac. There was one neighbor, there was one playground, and it was this like big, huge circle around that. And it was just like, our parents would send us out for the day. They would go, handle their business, go to work, right? We would be on this playground all day. And we would be, be the Black kids playing with Black kids, playing with, it was Martin Luther King's dream, right? And there was no sense of, there was no danger. It wasn't like the lights came on and you had to go home. It was like the lights came on, and if you weren't home, then it was a safe assumption that you were with somebody else's family. And no matter whose family that was, there wasn't this sense of like, oh shit, I gotta go get them. Like, it wasn't like, okay, he's playing with, my first best friend was a little white kid named Michael. It wasn't like Michael's family was like, oh shit, we got John over here and like he's got to go home. Or if it was like we're sending him home, he could just walk on the street by himself. Like, there was very much a sense of community, very much a sense of, and I think coming from the military mindset of like, we have a greater enemy, regardless of what's happening in, within our own walls, we have a greater enemy. So, if John is hanging out with Michael and people don't like that, who cares? Because there's an active enemy out there that people will get deployed to go fight against, that presents a greater threat to our nation. Um, so for me, I didn't understand race and or racism until I moved away from that. My dad retired from the military, we retired from the army, and we moved to the neighboring county. And you can look this up today. If you look at Muskogee County in Georgia uh, holds Fort Benning, which is the biggest army base in the world. Is how they tout themselves. If you look at Muskogee County's vote numbers today, they're very blue, which is surprising, honestly. But if you look at all of the neighboring counties, like what you were saying earlier, of you're in a blue pocket, but you're surrounded by red. If you look at Harris County, where I actually spent most of my formative years growing up, like that's where you see the heavily skewed white, heavily skewed Republican, heavily skewed like, you're not one of us, get the fuck out kind of people, to where I didn't understand that until I left the base.
Yeah, and I honestly, like, even hearing you say that, it's just so because the military is used as such a device, as such a political device, and I'll say for the past 4 years especially, and actually maybe longer than that, because I don't think, or at least my perception of Obama was that he did not misuse the military. But I'll go back as far as Bush, George W. Bush. To me, the military is automatically Republican. Period. Like, there's no like debate in between, because to me, at the end of the day, even though we have individual soldiers on the ground who have their beliefs, which I know because I have a cousin who served a few tours in Iraq. Okay, so like I knew that there's somebody who I loved very intimately, who was part of this monster that I viewed as a Republican monster who wasn't a Republican. So I know the soldiers aren't all one monolith, but I thought as an institution, frankly, that the power held in one place aligned with the Republican Party at all times, and that's always been my perception.
Yeah, I love to give you 2 points of that.
Yeah.
And number one, I agree with you very much on principle, right? Like, to me, in my opinion, if you were to ask me today, I think that the military is is the biggest fraternity in the nation. And in most nations, it's the biggest fraternity, right? When you think about fraternity life, when you think about again, I'm generalizing, right? But like, if you're generalizing like fraternization and like this like big coalition of like mostly men people, right? Like, it very much centers around like projecting strength, around like eradicating enemies, around like eliminating individual thought, right? So while you might say, I have a cousin or I have a so-and-so, who thinks differently, the military mindset is that individual thoughts are not welcome here, because they you endanger the entire troop, the entire squad, by going rogue, right? So I hear that on multiple points. I will say to that is that, while that may be true, let's also think historically. And let's also remember what I said earlier about greater enemies. So, when you think about integration, honestly, there's a lot of historical references that point to integration happening first in the military. About, we have this foreign threat, right? Like, it becomes less about internal racism within America and more about nationalism and more about being an American, because we have this foreign threat who is threatening our way of life. Let's all come together and fight. You have the Tuskegee Airmen, you have, these instances, and again, especially with enlisted lifestyle, of these groups that are forced to live together and live among each other, because it's not about, at the end of the day, they think like, it's not about who you're going to shoot. Are you capable of shooting a gun? Are you capable of taking down an enemy who says America sucks? I don't care if you're black, white, whatever. Like, you're capable of fighting alongside me to defeat this like, external enemy who threatens all of our institutions, which is like an interesting catch-22. I feel like the military got that heat when I was mostly growing up, of like, how dare you be a black man serving in the military? Like, you're serving this like racist ass organization. And now we have that with the police, right? Like, now we're coming after black police officers, and we're like, you serve this institution that was founded to like fuck our people up, So it's like, again, the military and the police are two different organizations, but like, there's a lot of commonalities, especially being one of the minorities within those organizations, that you have to question and you have to like kind of reckon with, about like, am I serving this to like help myself get ahead, versus like, by serving this, do I do my people a disservice in the long run?
Exactly. And I think that for me is the caveat that has made this topic, because you're now our third military related adjacent person that we've had on for this topic. And I think that for me, that's always been the caveat. It's like, okay, we're here for this country. We're here to do what we have to do. What is this institution doing for us? But before we even dive into those specifics, I want to know, like, well, shit, you joined the military. Like, what, like, why did you join, and what was the response to the people around you in your life when you made this decision?
Oof. Heavy. Real heavy. And I'm at a track, damn. No. here's what I'll say. So, in the time in which I was heavily influenced to join the military, um,
Heavily influenced. Where's this heavy influence
the heavy
coming
influence came from the heavy influence came from my parents, right? So
Mm,
my mom is very German. She's an immigrant. Very much like, I handle myself. Like I came over here, I didn't know English. Like I had to get by. My father is also military. He's an army brat. Well, he's an army kid, and he's very much like, I built my own. I came from two parents who were like, we built for ourselves.
from?
We don't see you building for yourself in college. Like it looks like you're in this position of like figuring out your identity. You haven't quite figured it out. Cool, but we're not going to support you while you do that. So if you need that help, here's where you can get medical benefits. Here's where you can get like a steady paycheck. Here's all those things. And growing up in Georgia, that is very common, right? Like I think the military it's touted, like I took the SATs and I took the ASVAB at the same time, right? And I did very well on both. So I had military recruiters and I had colleges calling me at the same time of like, continue your education, continue your career here. So it's like it's an equal pull, which I feel like Northerners don't really get, like, they don't get that same pull, right?
mm,
So for me, I got to a point to where I was doing the college route and I wasn't doing it right. And that was just on my own personal shit, right? But I got to a point to where the military seemed like a viable option. I will also caveat that and say I had long ass dreadlocks at the time. Like I had my hair it's in and of itself was a rebellion, right? Not only to my military father who like took me to the military barbershops and like all they do is one fade, and my mother who's just like, this is out of the norm, like what gives, like that in and of itself was a rebellion. And I felt like, oh my God, my hair, like that's my Samsonite strength. So to have to lose that to join the military, like they were hitting me up in high school when I had these, when I had my afro and I had my dreads, and they're like, you should join the military. And I'm like, but why? Or like, cool, let's talk about it. And they were like, well, you have to cut your hair. And I'm like, nope. Like, that's it. That's it. It was really on the hair. Like, that was really it. So like having to like get to that point to where like I really felt like I literally cut off my identity and like had to like take all of that off. I lost 5 pounds that night, no cap. Like in a grocery bag, the night before I went to basic training, I lost 5 pounds in the form of hair. It was just like I really felt like I lost myself, you know. And so there were so many things that were driving me to that, right? Like I had gotten sick and my parents were like, we're not gonna foot this bill. Like you gotta figure it out. You gotta be your own man or like be your own person at that point, right? Which is not a sentiment that I would necessarily wish upon my future generation, like especially as we have come across, talking to your kids about growing into individualism in adults. But like that's the generation that my parents came from. So that's what they were trying to, imprint upon me. And I respect it in that sense of like they were trying to build me to be an individual person. But I had a lot of issues with making that decision to join the military and join, especially as a baby child and especially as somebody who like very much values individualism and like having your own free thought, of joining an organization that like very much actively discourages that.
Yeah. And yeah, that's lovely. I'm actually not even going to side talk to that. I'm going to just go straight into the next question. So, what were your first impressions of the military then when you joined officially?
Sure. I think my first impressions were that it was just like with any other educational institute that I had at that point, was that this is easy. Like I came up through school very easily. Like I adapt very easily. It's just like, if you give me instructions on how to do something, I'm going to excel at it, was my thought process at that time. So, in basic training, I was a little bit older because I've been to college a couple of years. And, it was like your punishment for doing something wrong was, I'll give you an example. Punishment for doing something wrong was push-ups. It was like, you didn't make your bed perfectly, that's push-ups. And it's like, okay, like, you're not going to hit me because I grew up And if I didn't do something that somebody told me to do, I might get checked across the face. You can't do that? Well, then what's the worst you're gonna do? You're gonna yell at me? Like, okay. Like, it was that thing of like, it was like the B-Rab, like punishments of like, if I just get ahead of the narrative, right? Like, if I just get ahead of that and understand your worst case scenario, then it's not gonna be so bad. And that's where like really like in basic training, like the TIs or the drill instructors and all that, they lose their power. They lose their power when the people understand that the worst that you're going to do to me is not that bad. Like we got to a point where it was like we looked forward to doing push-ups. It's like I'm getting stronger, like bet, like flip the bed, who cares? We'll put the bed back together and do some push-ups, whatever, you know. And once we have that power, it really like flipped those tables, and we stopped getting that punishment. It stopped being a punishment because we looked at it as like, oh, this is fun, you know. And it helped our PT scores, and it helped, you know, it helped the things at the end of it all. So I think my view of the military is that it can be very scary for somebody who doesn't have the keys, like who doesn't have the like, they can only do so much. Like, and honestly, for me, it's like they can't put your hands on you. Like, you're not gonna win with me like that. Like everywhere I've been, it's
that's actually a good question sideways, because like I always, when I see them yelling in your face like that, and I'm like, I wish a motherfucker would drill sergeant my fucking face like that. And if I know them niggas can't touch me, there it's a wrap. Like, so is that a rule? Like, are they not allowed to hit you? Because in my head,
in the Air Force, that's a no. I can't say that for every institution, and I can't say that for especially the more rigorous, like, you know, you have your general. I feel like there's a big misconception when you see a military commercial. It always shows the extreme. It shows you like flying a helicopter and like parachuting into like enemy territory. For the most part, that's not going to happen. The majority of people, this is kind of scary and true, but the majority of people in the military serve in a security forces position. They are cops. The threshold for getting into the military, for example, I'll give you my example. I got an IT. The ASVAB score, which is like the SATs of the military, the score for that was very high because you have to have a lot of like different skill sets, right? But the absolute bare minimum, like if you could have any job in the Air Force, I only speak for the Air Force, but I know this is true across all military branches, is the lowest score is either supply or security forces. Cops and people who hand out basketballs and shit at the gym, right? Which, when you think about it, in like the national scene and outside the military too, is terrifying. Is you're giving these people the opportunity to enforce rules, to serve in, you know, a position of power, but not quite grasp how like power structures and shit work. And that is not to say, I will caveat that to say, that is not to say that all cops are shitty and that, you know, they're all dumb and all that stuff, right? Like there are plenty of people who join and serve and, you know, do that to fulfill the duties. But I will say that there's a much bigger threshold for the jobs of like IT and the jobs of other, you know, especially the ones that they show in the commercials versus what people end up actually doing.
And what did you actually end up doing?
I ended up doing, my official title was Cyber Transport Technician, which sounds like so fucking crazy. Like it sounds like Space Force. I'm actually salty. Yeah. Actually,
it sounds like Back to the Future,
right?
Like,
I'm salty.
Time traveling. Like.
I'm salty that Donald Trump created the Space Force after I had served, because that would have been a dope uniform. But that said, that was my job. Like my job is what I now do at WeWork, and like I did 4 years in the military, and I'm very grateful for those years. But also I have authority issues. I'm a baby child. Fuck all that. I'm an Aquarius. fuck all that. So I wouldn't do it again, but I wouldn't be where I was without all of those things in place. I wouldn't be in the position that I am now and be able to especially handle like constantly changing structures and like, you know, people trying to tell me what to do if I didn't have that foundation laid into place.
Word. And like and we see like listen in recent years with Donald Trump as president and like again the perception of this idea that like the military has to align with whoever the president is regardless period like it doesn't matter like we have seen certain policies that have been tried to be pushed. I'm thinking specifically of the trans community that feels really problematic, you know what I mean? And so, things like that for me make me question, is the military even inclusive? Like, is the military an inclusive space? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And I'm curious your thoughts on that, John.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's 100% like not only a great question, but just like so much to unpack. And here's how I will approach that. Number one, I'll say that I think that the public perception of the military is that they're not inclusive. And I think that it's totally fair and valid. I will say that having been within the system for a period of time and like having come up within that culture, there are some nuances and contexts that need to be put into place before coming to that conclusion.
Right.
And my context and nuances is that, yes, there have been executive orders and decrees that are aimed specifically at, you know, when it comes to especially like gender reassignment surgeries and like getting getting the adequate healthcare that you would need in order to, you know, be able to maintain yourself just, you know, on a healthy basis. Those have waned in the years of Republican rule. I 100% agree with that. I think I caution against the generalization of the military as a non-inclusive organization when it comes to understanding why. I think I just caution against the understanding of the why. And the reason that I would caution against that is because I think that the military's healthcare system is broken and flawed in and of itself. Like when you think about, especially when you think about war and when you think about us in wartime and you think about the mental health services that are offered to people and you think about, you know, people who get deployed and come back and they're not all the way quite right. You know, they come back a different person than how they left, and the services that are offered to them. The military does not think long-term in those senses. So therefore, when it comes to especially somebody thinking about who they are as a person, and that being a long-term journey and experience for themselves, that the military is just not equipped for that long-term journey for anybody, for anybody who says like, I may have been born a man, but I don't feel that way inside. The military is not equipped for that because again, that exists outside of a norm, outside of a standard. You cannot write a technical order. You cannot write something into like a military constitution that addresses that because all of those situations are nuanced. And the military is very much designed against that. Like the idea is that you do not think outside the norm so that you can comply, so that you can listen with these orders. And that is very difficult to reckon with, especially as somebody who is a minority and who is somebody who identifies differently from most of the majority of the people in the military, of just like, how do I get individual help? How do I get that kind of service that I need to perform effectively? I will say that that was different under the Obama years of like, for example, I was deployed in Afghanistan and, you know, during those years, Obama didn't see the need for so many troops to be in Afghanistan, so he said pull them back, right? During those years, the expansions for for VA, for the medical care that military vets needed, that all increased under the Obama years. But I feel like, in my opinion, Republicans look at that as the same way they'd look at welfare, the same way they'd look at most social service programs, of just like, there's just going to be people mooching off of this who don't actually need it, without truly understanding the individual needs of the people who are actually applying for that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I feel like that to be in the military in general is to risk being sort of clumped with these ideals and like misconceptions just automatically. Like I said, I have somebody in the military in my family, and I know them very well, and I know what they believe. Maybe like the back of my hand, I would say. You know what I mean? Because we talk about it. We talk about these things, and still what they represent does not necessarily align with what the representation of the military itself is that I receive as a civilian who's not part of the military in any way, shape, or form. I also often think about, though, John, like, it must be really difficult though to see that your organization is being aligned with things in a time where who you are as a person,
Yeah.
not aligned with a lot of
for sure.
with the military
For sure.
seemingly aligned with. So like, how do you guys on an individual level get to have your voices in this space that you are sort of a comrade of, while being like, yeah, I'm a person who serves in the military or has served in the past in the military, but I believe XYZ things. How much does the organization leave room for that sort of rhetoric versus how the country itself leaves room for the opinion that you have as a veteran?
I think just by default, my personality again is very much rebellious. Is very much smallest, youngest child. Very much, I'm gonna do my own thing. So how that presents itself in the military is that, yes, I understand that ideas and thoughts that I may have that may differ from the norm are not going to be easily and readily accepted, but that does not stop me from making them. Like, I have always felt like I have been in a position, or I have always been raised to believe that if you have a thought or you have an idea that may go against the grain, present it anyways. That's what my German mother taught me, and that's what my military father taught me. They both taught me that in different aspects. My mother taught me how to go hard on that, about how to, like, when you make your point known, have the receipts, because people are going to just by default question you. And that, I mean, I think that, to me, especially on a greater non-military point, is how you deal with people on social media. Like, social media, people come with all sorts of opinions and thoughts and ideas, and it's just like, okay, well, show your work, have the receipts. And then the way that my father presented that to me was more within the military aspect of, like, being able to talk to your superiors, being able to go against the grain without seeming like you're compromising the overall mission. And that is very, like, both of those things are very nuanced, of like, it's very hard, I will say, knowing that the way that I believe is that the military has been a tool used by mostly the Republican Party to say that, like, even in this election, it's like Trump's like, we'll wait till the absentee ballots from the military come in. And that's an assumption that all those votes will be, will skew Republican, and, will skew when we talk about gun rights and all that stuff. Like, it's always that assumption that the military will buy into that. When I can say that working from within, for the most part, the primary reason why military people vote Republican is because the Republican constituents tend to give the military the greatest pay increases. Like, when you look at your yearly, how am I getting more money? Republicans tend to give those greater, it's usually between, I'm going to say 2 and 5%, and they tend to be lower during the Democrat years. Like Obama did not give, I think the average is about, I think 3 to 3.5%. Obama wasn't hitting that. So it was like, he got to go because he's not putting money in my pockets, right? So for me, that wasn't my issue, right? Like I saw, I also saw less money coming in my pockets, but for me, it was less about that and more about what are we doing overseas? What are our foreign interests? Like, what do other countries think of us and how are, like foreign relations, right? Especially when I got to Afghanistan, and I'm glad that I went to Afghanistan in the Obama era because people still looked at us a little bit more favorably. It was less about you're coming to bomb us and fuck us up versus like, you're here to. When I went to Afghanistan, we helped develop the Afghan Air Force. So they were like, I would literally be overseas, like I would literally like be on base, and it wasn't a base, it was just like a bunch of sand, and like we would be driving around and there would be like planes that were like they would hit the airfield and you could tell it was worse than Spirit Airlines, you know what I'm saying? It was like, which is saying a lot, which was like you could see these planes like landing all awkwardly, like worse than Denzel Washington on Flight, like just this crazy shit, right? And you're like, wow, like for me it was like this is kind of what we're doing. This is the positive side that I could see of like giving adequate training to people to handle their own business, which as me as an individualist loves to see. It's very hard to contend with that when the general thought process behind the entire organization is that we're gun-toting, like liquor free, liquor, no tax at the liquor store, people who which if you're not taking advantage of that, you're playing yourself. But it's just like it's contending with both. And for me, it was like you always gonna know who I am, uniform or nah, which is what I can say the same for WeWork, right? Like WeWork gives you swag, they give you, basically a uniform. So many companies give you a uniform to wear and they say, yo, wear the jersey and rep the team. And I'm like, I'm not doing that unless you sign me to the Supermax contract, unless if I get injured or hurt in some way, then I know I have your full support.
Yeah. Whew. I love actually, like, I'd love to hear before you even keep going into the deeper politics of the military itself. I'd just love to hear from you, John, like given the politics around it, but what was your experience? What did you learn? What are some misconceptions outside of some of the ones you've already listed that people have about the experience of a Black person deciding that they're going to join the military and they're going to support in this cause that seems to be against them? Because again, if the idea or the rule of thumb is this is a white supremacist system, so everything we do still feeds white supremacy to some degree, is that fully true? And how does your experience in the military confirm or deny some of that?
Thank you for clarifying that, because I realized I did like hella track off that point. I would say that for me, joining the military as a Black man, I kind of gave you the story about having to cut off my dreads, right? So for me, before day one of basic training, that represented to me an idea of cutting off my individualism, which I had worked so hard to get. I couldn't even grow that hair out until I was 18 and I moved out of the house, right? Wow. Keep in mind that my father was military and my mother was German. So like for me, that represented the antithesis of what the military represented, right? So when I had to actually cut all that back and like actually join this thing, for me, I was very upset. I had a lot of anger. And my relationship with my parents deteriorated during that period, right? To give extra levels to that as a Black man was that I grew up in Columbus around Fort Benning, right? And then when I go back there now, if you go out to the bars, it's very much the stereotype of like, they're dudes out here trying to get married next week and also cheat on their wives when they're on deployment, right? Like, I grew up around military culture so that even if I wasn't one myself, I had a very good understanding of like what that was like.
Right.
So to have to, you know, I had recruiters assistance opportunities, which is basically like you go near a base, they give you like certain places to go hit, and you like basically recruit for the military. And I took mine in Tampa or in Sarasota, Florida. Um, and where I took mine is very interesting. Sarasota is just an interesting place.
I know Sarasota. I spent some
Beach,
time
baby.
there. Very
Mhm.
interesting. A lot
Right?
of retired people.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot of old retired people who have a lot of respect for the military.
Right.
So when I went, I had people trying to buy my groceries and shit. And it was like, I joined the military to be independent. So hearing somebody be like, I'll buy your groceries or like, you know, I'm willing, thank you for your service, threw me off. Like I'll say to this day, Veterans Day is on Tuesday.
Mhm.
I still feel some type of way when somebody's like, thank you for your service. Because like you would do this too if this was your job. Like if this was the primary way that you could support your own, like, and that's what you did. Like nobody, you don't thank other people just for doing their job. Like whatever, you know, I'm not saying like, oh my God, I don't say to you yearly, thank you for hosting this podcast. You know, it's like, to me, that just doesn't register. So for me being in that position, having somebody thank me for something like that, and especially being a black man and being thanked was like really confusing. It was like, what do you like? My parents didn't thank me for doing my chores. Like, you know, why are you thanking me now? Or why are you trying to do extra shit for me now that you wouldn't, if I wasn't wearing this uniform, you wouldn't offer to buy my groceries. So, like, what about this uniform changes that? That's very bizarre for me, especially as a black man, right? So, to combat with that, and also, I think for me over time, the position that I sit at now is that I left the military. I knew when I signed up, I was doing a 4-year agreement. I won't say it was a jail sentence, but I will say that I knew that I was getting out after 4. Like I knew I wasn't going to reenlist. My dad was a career military man. He did 20 years. He still goes on base every day, and I love him for that. Like that's the type of person that he is. I knew immediately upon day one that that was not for me. But I would not be in the position that I am at now if it weren't for those military years. I have a security clearance. I still work in IT. I still deal with people trying to tell me what the fuck to do that I don't necessarily care for. You know, I'm very grateful for that, right? So for me, I'm in this complicated position, especially when talking to young black men who are like, should I join the military? Of like, I don't think that I dissuade anybody from joining the military. But
Oh, you muted yourself, John.
sorry. I think it's very important to give context, to give like, you need to have, I would like to give people more than what I had when I made that decision to join the military, when I give it to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's great. And honestly, like, I guess for me, again, a lot of the exploration of this dialogue comes around this idea that I know I am A, not in the military, B, like, have only what people have told me about the military, and don't think that it's something that I, in the way I have strong opinions about, should be yelling about on the mountaintops without having full context actually.
Ask it. You have a question that you want to ask it.
No. I'm saying, no. I'm prefacing that to say, like, you know, like, I think that there's a way in which those of us who are not in the military actually don't understand the military. We need to start accepting the fact that, like, even though we're like, oh, make peace, not war, that's a great statement and that's a great stance to have. What does that actually mean in terms of the organism and how it works and the people who are choosing to participate? Because again, my particular experience with the military is more around, which is to the leading question that I was getting to, around the fact that, like, there's tons of different jobs. And in our last, in 2 episodes ago, we had Adiza Jabril, who's in the military as well, but she's part of the band and the chorus. And it's just like, what? Y'all got a band in the chorus for what?
Yes.
So like, the question I wanted to ask you is like, to your point about like all the politics around it, the military itself, whether it's Army, Navy, whatever the fuck, there are jobs that are just legitimate jobs that I could say either you're doing it in the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy or the U.S. Marines, or you're doing it in Hollywood, or you're doing, like, there's just certain roles that exist. And so one of the things that had surfaced for us in our episode with Adiza was this idea that, like, yes, she's in the military chorus, but the military chorus is not coming to Black and brown communities looking for the singer, right? So like a lot of times when you have a lot of people who are super patriotic and back the military, who tend to be Republican, again, I'm putting it in air quotes because being a Republican means so many different things than it did even just like, you know, like 8 years ago. So like that the idea of that is that perhaps the recruitment strategies, that perhaps our misconception comes from the recruitment strategies that the military has. And so I'm interested for you, like, do you think that there is room in the military to expand the way that people of color get to engage being in the military and what their experience is in the military? Because you were in IT. I don't know the stats around how many people of color were among you, but I'm curious to hear, like, where do you see the majority of Black and brown bodies put together in the military during your time of service?
Ooh, this is the best question. This by far the best question, and it's like almost my recruitment pitch, right? So for one, I'm gonna call back to, if you look at a commercial for any of the armed forces, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, all that, they show the extreme. They show you in some sort of combat simulation. They show you like fucking somebody up, right? That is the number one. Statistically speaking, only 1% of the entire American population is in the military, right? To speak even further to that, 1% of that 1% are the people who land in those roles.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're looking at, the advertisement that's being displayed to you, is not what you're gonna do. Like, that's just facts. Like, plenty of people go into these, like the Navy SEALs program, the Army PJ program, like even the infantry, like the Ranger program. They go through all these programs and they fail out at some point for some reason. It's mostly health related. It's mostly like, you got a bum ankle, you got asthma, you know, you got something that like prevents you from doing the thing on the commercial that they want you to do. But that is what drives people to join. So it's like, even if I end up handing out basketballs, I joined the military because I wanted to be this, like, you know, insane jump out of a parachute and fuck up all the terrorists kind of person. So for me, it's like realistically explaining to people of like, this is your realistic, you know, life choice. And especially as a Black man, it's like, you don't see Negroes in this commercial. Like, relax. Like, you're not a Tuskegee Airman, right? Like, the Tuskegee Airmen are dope. And I grew up in Georgia. You can go to Montgomery, you can go to this museum, but like, it's a museum, you know? It's not like you have people who are like, these are people who are actively doing this that are coming to speak at your schools. You know, I didn't even have that. Like, when the military people came to my school, it wasn't like I had my face represented in this person who's telling me that, like, you know, I served in like 4 or 5 combat wars and like, you know, this is what you can do. I never have that. And maybe I'm generalizing, but I don't think that the majority of Black and brown kids get that experience either. My dad came in for career day when I was in 4th grade, and it was dope. Don't get me wrong, it was one of the best school days of my life, but he was just more so like, let me flex my biceps and you can do pull-ups off of them, and less so about like, here are the actual paths. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's 4th grade. It's like, it's less about that and more about like, the military is cool. So I think that there is a huge deficiency in explaining to people how you can actually make use of the skills that you have and the skills that the ASVAB, the SAT of the military, will explain to you in making that into a long-term career. I didn't even get that from my own dad who was in the military. I had to figure that out on my own. So if I were to be a military recruiter, that would be the position that I take of just like, let's find out what you're good at, right? You're very handy with mechanics, you're very handy with math and sciences. So if you were to join the military, like this should be the route, the career that you go down. And if you get out, like recruiters will never talk about that. Recruiters talk about getting out of the military as if I don't even have a comparable example. Like there's just no good example. It's like if you get out of this, then you're dead. Like you might as well be dead to me. So it's like nobody talks about that the post. And I mean same thing with any employer. It's like no employer talks with you about if you leave our company, how we can help you succeed. Fuck that. They put all this effort and all these resources into you, so they don't want you to leave. So for me, especially when I was in the Air Force, it was like I'm getting out, and I told them I was like, I'm getting out, like this, and it was the perception around that was very much you're going to be flipping fries at McDonald's and not like here's how you can take the certifications, the security clearance that you got in IT, the skills that you built here to propel you forward. And I think that to me is my biggest gripe with the military, more so than the public perception of like them being Republican, gun nuts, and all that, is that they do not like people to leave. And that is fraternization to me at its finest. Of like, if you leave us, cultish, honestly, of like, if you leave us, you are fucked. Recruiters will not talk to you about how to get out. They'll only talk to you about how to get in. Everybody that you encounter only talks about how to keep you. They don't talk about what happens if they lose you.
And I love that. I love that because I think that it's important to know that, like, when you're committing to this thing called the U.S. military, whatever institution you choose, whichever alphabet, and whatever, right. It's important for you to understand that there's a getting into it, but there's a getting out. Yeah. And there's being a citizen, and then there's being a U.S. veteran, which is a whole different thing. And I think that, like, for me, a lot of my passion around the military came from, again, the one cousin, I got one who's in there. And like, I think about his life now, and I think about all the things he was doing in the military. And I'm like, this motherfucker was flying aircraft, doing all types of crazy strategist shit, and is now reduced to working in XYZ industry. How is that reduction okay? And like, I'm not cool with that because I've spent X amount of years being traumatized and thinking that my cousin was going to die, literally, like, and not come back home. And then only to come back home and be in such a position where he has to work jobs listen, and no job is too big or too small, right? But like, compared to what I knew he was doing in the military, I'm like, damn, this seems like small potatoes. How is this the work you're doing now? It doesn't make sense to me that your post-saving America life is this. Like, how is this your life? And so I often have a hard time distinguishing how much of that is based off of the institution itself and what they want to give to people versus what the U.S. government as a whole provides and gives to others to try to survive. So that's another thing that I've tried to unpack. And that's not directing a specific question to you.
No, sure.
In the statement of like, yeah, well, I even wonder about the U.S. military. And I'm like, yeah, y'all got all these motherfuckers out here. And I know some of them. And I wonder about, like, when they give themselves to you and when they don't try to get out in a sneaky way, where they're not dishonorably discharged or anything like that, y'all still fail to meet them. And you still, especially for people of color, spit them back out in a position where, like, yes, they have a military badge, but does that badge mean anything for them as Black or brown Americans in this country when they're moving around. And no, right? Because a police officer, if they're looking at somebody black and they shooting, they don't know that you're in the military. Like all these things are seemingly accolades. To me, don't seem to make up for the fact that your skin color can trigger somebody else into thinking you're a certain thing and demean your U.S. citizen status down to a nigga, when really you're a veteran, you're this, you're decorated that. Like there's so much. And so to me, it's important to understand, like, what is this institution actually doing? Like, is this institution actually taking responsibility for the fact of the fact that these people have identities outside of them? That them being marked as military people is not the only mark that they needed, and it's not the mark that's going to get them through living in this country and survive. That they can still be targets amidst all of that. And so that's usually my gripe with the military. But thank you, John, for sharing a lot of what you're sharing, because I do think that for us non-military people, it's important to continue to echo the fact that this is a very individual experience, and that me, as you know, as just Julissa having her political opinions, is not going to cover the gambit of what other people of color feel or are experiencing in this very moment of being in the military. And I do want to highlight, excuse me, Black Girl Magic Wine. I do want to highlight that actually, in keeping up with these election numbers, I believe it was Pennsylvania, if not Georgia, where they were like, "Oh, we got all the military votes for people who are from this state," and they just got here, and they're seemingly leaning really blue. And the commentator was like, "Oh, we're spread here from the military, blah blah blah," and it's just like, yeah, because the military is comprised of citizens just like any other institution. Right. It's like, and I dare say the police force, right? Whatever state you want to name, like I'm sure that we have some secret fucking white supremacists in certain police groups in certain states in this country, but we also have the opposite living in a lot of police forces in a lot of states in this country. And so I think that having that vote come in and seeing that it was skewing blue was so important, because at the end of the day, like, yes, these motherfuckers sign up to look out for us as a country, but they're still individuals who have to look out for themselves. And so the military doesn't necessarily compromise your status as a BIPOC person in this country. It doesn't mean that you automatically subscribe to this idea of what the military is saying or doing. And it also doesn't mean that the military itself is saying or doing much of anything, but that it's being used as propaganda of bigger groups to say the military is doing this. The military agrees, or the military people agree with, like one military person can agree with Trump and suddenly the whole military supports Trump. You know what I mean? Right. So I do think that these nuances are important. And all of that leads me to a question that I feel like you've kind of already answered, but like, should people join the military? Like now in 2020, and knowing what we know and what we learned today, we're going to have a Joe Biden presidency for the next 4 years. There's a lot of changes happening. Do we still think that the idea of joining the military holds the same weight that it held back when you joined, John? And do you still encourage people to join? Why or why not?
I think those are two different questions.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. Yeah, I think that they're very much two different questions, right? Like, if you ask my dad, should people join the military? He's going to unequivocally say yes. If you ask me if you should join the military, again, I'm going to answer that with context and nuance. And my context and nuances are on a multitude of topics. Number one, what type of person are you? Are you the type of person who takes orders? Are you this is outside of the ASVAB. It's outside of like your understood perceived skill set. Like none of that truly matters if you will not listen to somebody, right? And I am that person, which is why I only did 4 years in the military. It's like, whether or not, the reason that I listen to people is that I think that their ideas are valid. So if you have somebody in my circle who presents an idea to me that I don't agree with, I'm just not going to do it, you know? If I encounter people like that, then I'm going to also say to them, you got the same qualities that I do, so I don't think that you should do it. I will say that historically, I've had mad people ask me, like, should I join? Help me join. I don't automatically say no. My position is like, it's a yes until it's a no. So let's start at the yes. I'm going to ask some follow-up questions, and based on how you answer those questions, that might influence my decision, right? I had somebody who I helped study for the ASVAB, and they failed it. Like they did not qualify for any position in the army to join the military. So I studied with them. I said, here's how I can help you pass the ASVAB. Like, here's what we can do to like improve your proficiencies. They took that test, they passed it. Once they passed it, they didn't select the job that they would have selected had the original outcome been like, you can join. So it's like, for me it's very much like, I won't dissuade anybody because I didn't care for it. I still say that I don't care for it. I did my 4 years, and like, I'm without those 4 years, I'm not where I'm at. Clearly, hands down. But just because that is a situation for me doesn't mean that I push that upon anybody else. Especially in today's age, to where, like you said, you know, there's a lot of people who gather ideas about the military based on their either immediate resources or their general understanding. Like, you have to be a type of person to be able to contend with that. You know, I had to be the type of person to contend with being a Georgia boy in the military and having people saying, "Oh, well, you're one of those Fort Benning boys who's just trying to get somebody pregnant and get married in 3 weeks." You know,
Right.
some people do not. Some people don't have that character. You know, some people do not have that ability to be able to contend with that. And if I don't feel like you are that type, then that's my opinion. I'm gonna let you know that. But if I feel like you're that type of person who I think can progress the idea of what I feel, what from my experience, what I have experienced about the military, about it actually being a low key, really inclusive organization of like putting people together, living people, especially in the housing department, of putting people next to each other who would have never ever had that opportunity to live next to somebody to understand the like true ideals of said person. If I feel like you're that type of person to be able to contend and to like, make that flourish, then yeah, I'm going to support you in that. It's very much hit or miss. But I will say that for the most part, in my actual experience, it's been more hit than miss.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that I think that that's beautiful. So if you were to have to say thank you to the military for something that it's done for you in your life, what are you thanking the military for?
I mean, I will 1,000% say number one, thanks for structure. And I hate structure. It's hard to like say those two things at the same time. I hate structure, but thank you to the military for you know giving me the idea. Well, not the idea, but giving me a sense of structure. Like having to do PT at 5 in the morning. I'm not a morning person, but given the idea that I have to do some sort of physical exercise every day, thank you. Um, Thank you to the military for providing me a network, you know? So oftentimes, like even now, like we talked about ERGs at WeWork, right? I've had the people who are trying to start up the veterans at WeWork employee resource group. They're reaching out to me, and I haven't done any. It's not like I've done anything other than announce it on my self identification that I am a veteran. I've done more work for people of color, so it would make more sense for those people to reach out to me. But just for the simple fact that I said that I'm a veteran, I've had those people reach out to me. And I want to help people who want to help a group of people get better, regardless, well, as long as I identify with it, right? As long as that's your end game, right? So when these people reaching out to me, I'm like, it feels weird. Like with Veterans Day, it feels weird for me to celebrate it because I don't feel like a veteran. Like, yeah, I went to Afghanistan, but I ain't shooting nobody. Like, it's not like I was SEAL Team 6 and like did Osama in. It was just like, and just I did what I was told to do. So like, don't give me any extra credit for that. So to be in a position now to serve as an example for other people who are looking to join, who are struggling with those same concepts that I struggled with, is a little bit weird for me. It's like almost that's the imposter syndrome for me of like, I do not feel like I have so many identities that I can reconcile with. Maybe being the son of Lenny Kravitz, being a black man, being all these things, but like along that list, like towards the bottom is actually being a military veteran. It's one of the last things that like I associate myself with, even though I know that's true. I don't think anybody's wrong in coming at me for that,
Right.
So
right.
it's just such a bizarre position to hold, being just a 4-year veteran. I'm sure that you've interviewed multiple veterans, and like especially the longer time that they've served, the more connected they feel with that, right? But it's just like if you went to an hour of some event, and then they ask you like, yo, how'd the event go? And you're like, I only have an hour's worth, so I can't give you the entire perspective.
Right. Yeah. And I honestly, though, I do think, though, John, that your perspective is valuable, whether it's the answer that people might conventionally want to hear or think they are supposed to hear, given the fact that we're talking about the military. I think that the answer is important because, again, for somebody who is not involved in the military and who is not like, you know what I mean, like trying to really participate in that way where I would ever sign up, I think to hear the voice of our own people speaking for themselves and the experience that they had is crucial because one of the things that inspired this segment for me is that like the same cousin who I keep talking about, like I've never sat down with him and had a full conversation. I've never sat down with him and said, hey, what is your actual experience? And this is somebody who was on the ground, who was literally like shooting motherfuckers and having to kill civilians in Iraq. Like is the more like conventional framework of what we think the military is. But I think that part of my trying to unpack what it is also to understand what it is not. And what it is not does not mean that you, John, or you, or any of the other guests that we've had so far are people who are in the front lines and like risking their life. And also the idea that the definition of PTSD doesn't only live with people who are on the battleground, who are seeing bombs go off. That PTSD also can come from an experience, from a conditioning that is being like whipped into you over and over and over again, especially if you are, serving and doing tours in a certain country, whether or not you are frontline battle people, even doing IT for the military in a time where there's a fucking like war going on is terrifying, just like it's fucking traumatizing to be a US citizen during a pandemic whose biggest job is to stay the fuck home. If you know what I mean, there's still PTSD associated with that.
Yeah, can I offer you a bite to that? I think one of the biggest misconceptions and like one of the biggest reasons why Veterans Day is so hard for me is because when people say thank you for your service, I read that as them telling me, especially if they follow it up with like, did you do any tours or anything like that? And I tell them I was in Afghanistan. They assume that like I was in the Hurt Locker, right?
Yeah.
they take that and say that this is a foreign, and like this is something foreign. This is something that could never happen to the average American. When for me, it's like I want to give a happy Veterans Day to literally any nigga everywhere. like you have survived through something that is akin to this warfare. Like you have survived something that you have survived some sort of assault on your character, on your identity, on who you are, that very closely mirrors anything that I've experienced. And like I worked in IT, I was in an air-conditioned building in Afghanistan, like 110 degrees was not a thing for me, right? Like the worst thing that happened to me on my deployment was that yes, the mortar came in, but it hit the Pizza Hut. Like, like I'm not struggling. So please do not lump me in that same category as you do the Hurt Locker motherfuckers who are like truly PTSD, truly need mental health care, truly need reintegration care. I know integration is a hard word as a black man to say.
Many things, it's not just the wrong race. 100%.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like you truly do need help coming back into society that, you would expect me to have.
Right.
Don't expect that,
Oof, John, that is a wonderful note to stop on for this segment. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And like I said, for me, as somebody who's just so inherently anti-military without real basis outside of the fact that I was just terrified that my cousin who decided to join the military might die. Like that was really the big thing for me. I really, really do appreciate your perspective on this. So John, tell us, where can we find you on social media? Any exciting things coming up that we should look out for?
Okay.
Or not, or not.
I won't say that I'm the biggest social media aficionado, but however, I have been told in my post-military days that I resemble a certain celebrity. I've had people take pictures of me because of it. You can find me on Instagram at Hey You Look Just Like. I mean, you figure out who the just like is just like. Other than that, I mean, I am friends with the hosts of the show. I very much support everything that they're doing. Yes, the both of you. One of you believes that, and one of you is like, oh, "Why are you stalking me?" And other than that, you know where to find me. I'm happy to have any sort of conversation about what we talked about on this podcast, or just about life in general. You can find me johnmark2189@gmail.com. That's all the plugs that I have.
Yes. Awesome. Skittles, where can they find us?
Yes, and you guys can find us at Ladies Who Brunch at Instagram, Ladies Brunch on Twitter, at Julissa on Instagram, and at The Real Skittles with a Z at the end for me.
All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. And until next time, with a new president, y'all go ahead and bronche.